imperial guards found him hiding in the abandoned villa's wine cellar, clutching a small vial of poison in his trembling hand. This wasn't some common criminal or political rebel. This was Sporus, barely 20 years old, once the Empress of Rome, about to take his own life rather than face what the new emperor had planned for him in the Colosseum. But to understand why death seemed like mercy compared to what awaited him, we need to go back 3 years to when a grieving, half-mad emperor first laid eyes on a teenage boy who looked exactly like his dead wife. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of Roman excess. It's the most disturbing case of identity theft in human history, where the thief didn't steal a name or fortune, but an entire person's existence, surgically erasing one life to resurrect another. And the most terrifying part, everything I'm about to tell you comes from official Roman records. Rome 65 AD, the most powerful man in the world has just become a murderer. Not through war or execution. Those were everyday occurrences in the empire. No, Emperor Nero had just killed his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, with his own hands in their private chambers. Some sources say it was a single devastating kick to her swollen belly. Others describe a brutal beating that left her hemorrhaging on the marble floor, while Nero, suddenly realizing what he'd done, screamed for physicians who couldn't reverse death, even for a god emperor. The woman who died that day wasn't just any imperial wife. Poppaea Sabina had been Nero's obsession, his muse, the one person who could match his grandiose view of himself. Contemporary accounts describe her as possessing almost supernatural beauty, amber-colored hair that caught light like spun gold, skin so pale it seemed to glow, and most distinctively enormous doe-like eyes that Roman poets compared to those of Venus herself. But here's what most people don't realize about Nero's grief. It wasn't normal. Human mourning. When you command an empire of 60 million souls, when you've been told since childhood that you're descended from gods, when reality itself bends to your will, the death of your beloved isn't just loss. It's a personal insult from the universe. It's a boundary that dares to exist when you recognize no boundaries. Nero's response to Poppaea's death shocked even the jaded Roman aristocracy. He refused the traditional cremation, instead having her body embalmed with more spices than the entire Arabian Peninsula produced in a year. He had her corpse dressed in her finest robes and placed in a crystal sarcophagus where he could see her. Palace servants reported finding the emperor having full conversations with the body, setting places for her at dinner, asking her opinion on matters of state. The court physicians, those brave or foolish enough to approach him, tried to explain that grief could manifest in strange ways. But Nero wasn't just grieving. He was fracturing. Sleep became impossible. Without massive doses of poppy wine, he would wake screaming Paea's name, convinced he could hear her calling from the next room. Food lost all taste unless it was prepared exactly as she had liked it. He ordered her personal chambers preserved exactly as she left them, down to the position of her hairbrush on the dressing table. But the most disturbing behavior began about 2 months after her death. Nero started seeing her everywhere in the face of a young slave girl, bringing wine, in the profile of a senator's wife at the games, in the features of prostitutes in Rome's CIA districts. He would stop mid-sentence during important meetings, staring at some random woman who bore even the slightest resemblance to his dead wife. More than once, he terrified innocent women by grabbing their faces, turning them toward the light, searching desperately for something that wasn't there. The imperial household held its breath, waiting for this madness to pass. Instead, it intensified. Nero commissioned hundreds of paintings and sculptures of Poppaea, demanding artists capture not just her appearance, but her essence. When they inevitably failed, how could paint and marble capture a living soul? He would fly into rages, sometimes ordering the artist beaten, sometimes weeping like a child. Then came that fateful day in late 65 AD, when everything changed. Nero was reviewing administrative appointments, a mind-numbing task he usually delegated, but was forcing himself to focus on as a distraction from his grief. A young freedman, recently promoted to a minor, clerical position, was brought forward to be confirmed in his new role. The emperor looked up from the endless scrolls and time stopped. The boy standing before him, he couldn't have been more than 15, had Poppaea's eyes. Not similar eyes, not a passing resemblance, but the exact same enormous dark-lashed eyes that had captivated Nero from the moment he first saw her. The same delicate bone structure framed them, the same way of unconscious, the ones who had painted Poppaea from life. They were ordered to study Sporus and create comparative sketches, noting where he matched the dead empress and where he differed. Nero pored over these studies with the intensity of a scholar examining sacred texts, making notations, planning modifications. But it wasn't just physical appearance Nero was analyzing. He had Sporus speak for hours, listening to his voice, correcting his pronunciation, teaching him Poppaea's distinctive way of drawing out certain vowels. He tested the boy's walk, his gestures, the way he held his hands when sitting. Every deviation from Poppaea's mannerisms was noted for correction. The psychological torture had already begun. Sporus was forbidden to use his own name. Servants were instructed to address him as lady or mistress. His simple tunics were replaced with flowing stirs in Poppaea's favorite colors. He was taught to apply cosmetics, not the simple touches appropriate for a Roman youth, but the elaborate makeup of a noble woman. Can you imagine waking up each morning, looking in the polished bronze mirror, and seeing your own face being systematically erased? The servants who attended Sporus during this period later reported that he barely spoke, barely ate, moved through his days like someone in a waking nightmare. But he didn't resist. How could he? One word of complaint would mean death, or worse. Because by now, Sporus had learned what Nero intended. The emperor hadn't hidden his plans. In fact, he spoke of them openly, excitedly, like an artist describing a masterpiece in progress. The physicians had been consulted. The procedure had been explained. Sporus was going to be physically transformed into a woman through castration and surgical modification. This wasn't just removing masculinity. Roman eunuchs were common enough in certain roles. This was something unprecedented. An attempt to surgically create a woman from a man, to rebuild Sporus's body into an approximation of feminine form. The physicians, threatened with death if they refused, and promised immense rewards if they succeeded, had devised procedures that went far beyond simple castration. The night before the surgery, something remarkable happened. Nero visited Sporus in his chambers, bringing with him a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, Poppaea's wedding ring, a massive emerald surrounded by pearls. "Tomorrow," Nero said, sliding the ring onto Sporus's finger, where it hung loosely. "You will be reborn." You will become who you were always meant to be, and I will love you as I loved her." Sporus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Will it hurt?" For just a moment, something almost human flickered in Nero, replaced by that manic certainty. "Birth always hurts," he replied. "But what emerges is beautiful." The surgery took place in a specially prepared chamber in the palace's medical wing. The exact details are mercifully sparse in historical records, but we know it lasted hours. The screams, according to one account, could be heard 3 corridors away, despite the thick walls. Nero waited outside, pacing like an expectant father, occasionally shouting encouragement through the door, as if his words could somehow ease the agony. The recovery took months. Infection was a constant threat in an age before antibiotics. The modifications were extensive enough that Sporus had to relearn basic functions. Through it all, Nero was a constant presence, supervising the healing, adjusting dosages of pain-dulling poppy extracts, even helping change bandages with his own imperial hands. This tender care might seem touching until you remember its purpose. Nero wasn't nursing a person back to health. He was crafting an object to fulfill his obsession. Every gesture of kindness came with a reminder of what Sporus was becoming. Nero would sit by his bedside, reading aloud from Poppaea's favorite poems, telling stories about her, as if Sporus should remember them, gradually blurring the line between who Sporus was and who he was being forced to become. The physical healing was one thing. The psychological transformation was another. As Sporus recovered, an army of tutors descended upon him. He learned to walk in the smaller, swaying steps, considered proper for a Roman matron. His hands were trained to move with studied grace, to hold a wine cup delicately, to gesture while speaking in the restrained manner expected of imperial women. The voice training was perhaps the most intensive. Hour after hour, Sporus practiced speaking in higher, softer tones, learning to modulate his voice to sound feminine. He was taught Poppaea's favorite phrases, her way of laughing, even her specific intonations when addressing different members of court. A wardrobe was commissioned. Not just any women's clothing, but exact replicas of Poppaea's favorite garments. The imperial seamstresses, working from preserved samples, recreated her most iconic dresses. Jewelers reset her personal collection.